Happy Tuesday, everyone. I'm Elise Bullock with the Department of Navy Office of Small Business Programs. It's great to see you all here today for today's webinar, Shielding Small Business, Navigating Adversarial Foreign Capital for National and Economic Security. We are committed to maintaining a strong connection to our small business community, delivering impactful knowledge and resources that support your growth and your collaboration with the Department of the Navy. Remember, small businesses are a driving force for innovation, and though these webinars are excited to engage with both our long-standing and new partners alike. You can catch up on our previous sessions by visiting the Outreach and Past Events section on our website or tuning into our YouTube channel. For more resources, our website at www.secnav.navy.mil/small business has everything you need, from Don OSBP operations plan to details on how to engage with us, including our long-range acquisition estimate. Don't miss out on any updates. Sign up for our newsletter on our website. And for the latest news and events, make sure you connect with us on Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Today's lineup includes speakers that promise to deliver engaging and valuable insight. Make sure to use the Q&A feature for any questions you may have. Introducing our speakers today, please give a warm welcome to Ms. Andrea Carpenter. She serves as the Director of the Department of Navy's Foreign Investment Review Team and Assistant Secretary of the Navy or Research and Development Acquisition. In this role, Andrea oversees the management of adversarial capital issues in relations to industrial base and economic security. Prior to joining RD&A team, Andrea spent 5 years at NAVC as the Mission Compatibility Program Lead, deconflicting mission impacts for development near or in key testing and evaluation areas. Andrea was a contractor for 6 years at OPNAV and OSD before entering the civilian workforce in 2016. Addition to Andrea, we have Mr. Tim Varley. Timothy is the Deputy Director for Foreign Investment Review at the Assistant Secretary of the Navy Research and Development Acquisition. Thurr serves as the Navy Marine Corps lead on adversarial capital issues and provide risk and mitigation strategies to achieve economic security across the Department of Navy. Prior to his work in acquisition, Timothy spent 15 years in the intelligence community as a supervisory intelligence officer, overseeing teams performing a variety of missions, including counterintelligence, counterterrorism, law enforcement, resources and infrastructure, and East Asian geopolitics. Before joining the intelligence community, he served in the United States Air Force. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Andrea and Timothy. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for having us today. We're really happy to be here. My name is Andrea Carpenter, and we're gonna be sharing some information that's hopefully valuable to all the participants on the line. I believe our slides are being shared for us. Are you sharing our slides? There we go. Perfect. Thank you, Destiny. Great. So if you could move on to slide 2, please. So a little bit about our team. So we're the Foreign Investment Review Team, as was introduced, and we represent Department of Navy and Marine Corps, or Navy and Marine Corps stakeholders, and we're looking at issues associated with technology transfer, loss of IP, and other types of risks resulting from adversarial foreign capital into U.S. companies, primarily those that are servicing the Department of Navy. Our day job is mostly to advocate and coordinate for impacted programs. So we work very closely with program managers, test directors, supply chain managers, the intelligence community, lots of different folks, depending on the issues that we're dealing with. This is a very far-reaching topic, as we'll discuss, and there's no, one place where it neatly fits. So our goal for today is to raise awareness of the issue, and hopefully give a few recommendations based on some of the concerning transactions that we have seen. And this is an issue that is going to be increasingly important, not only to the Department of Navy, but I think what we're seeing out of Congress and out of the President is a good benchmark as to how much more attention is going to be paid to this topic moving forward. Next slide, please. So, as we stated, my team provides risk and mitigation strategies for the Department of the Navy to achieve economic security. So economic security is a really vast term. It means lots of things to lots of different people. So to scope it, we're looking primarily at how these adversarial investments may affect the Department of the Navy and maybe more broadly the Department of Defense. And our portfolio contains lots of different things, but summarized here are some of our main areas, our priority areas. So CFIUS, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S., and I'll talk about that a little bit in a second. Team Telecom and engagement, just like this, within and outside the department to illuminate foreign investment risks. So CFIUS, very relevant to today's conversation. The Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S. is an interagency committee led by Treasury, and it is tasked with assessing and addressing foreign investment risks from certain types of foreign investment into U.S. companies. And the Department of Defense is a member agency to that committee. So we represent the Department of Navy and feed into DoD. Team Telecom, that is managing FTC licenses that involve foreign applicants. So it's mostly telecommunications types issues. And then we might be looking at, one-off situations within the department. Tim, is there anything you want to add from slides 2 or 3?
No, ma'am. I think you covered it well.
Great. So we can move on to the next slide, please. Slide 4. So small businesses are uniquely positioned in this space. You're oftentimes at the forefront of innovation. You're doing stuff that is super cool that other folks might not be doing, but you're also potentially in a vulnerable spot because you might need investment to support your operations. So we're going to spend the bulk of our time on this slide and the next. And if you have questions, please feel free to chime in as we talk about this. So the graphic on the right, this is focused on, just showing how China is looking to achieve its strategic goals. It's no secret that China is trying to become the next national superpower, and it's taking advantage of legal and illegal mechanisms to gain advantage, whether that's through, joint ventures, academia, certain types of investments, into S&T or through mergers, but they have a very comprehensive strategy that they're leveraging. So, generally the U.S. welcomes foreign investment. It's a really important part of our economy. It's a, driver of our GDP, but we do have to, I think overall, I'm noticing that there's a bit of a shift in thinking on a much broader scale that we probably have to start taking a closer look at some of these investments that are coming in. And I think not only from a national security perspective, but also from a business risk perspective. And this is something that I have some examples that I'll provide for each of these bullets here. So some things to think about from a business perspective. Loss of IP or technology transfer. If you have an investor come in and they gain access to proprietary information, or they restructure the organization in a way where they suddenly have access to certain things and then they're able to take that information with them, that could be a huge financial loss. That could be the entire backbone of your company that's being taken out from under you. Loss of control. We've seen situations where, a company accepts a foreign investment and there are some strings attached with it. They may say, well, we need to have a board member. And over time, they slowly chip away and add more, they might invest more into that company. But eventually, and this is a real situation, they replaced the entire board and fired the CEO and kicked him out of his own company, and then took all of the knowledge and data with them. Offshoring is a concern. There was an investment a few years ago where it was a pretty ubiquitous supplier. There was nothing technologically advanced with it, but the investor that came in decided to shutter all the US facilities and move them all overseas. What happened was that supplier provided a critical thing that had to be made in the US. So that was a big problem. Production changes, and I'm sorry, give me 1 sec. My dog is trying to get out of the house. 1 sec. Sorry about that. Production changes or facilities closures. So we had a situation where a private equity firm came in, and as part of the investment, they made it very known that they were probably going to shut down facilities if their investment, based on their ROI. And that's exactly what happened. And that had, impacts not only to the Department of Defense because of what was produced there, but that also has ripple effects into the local economies if it means, jobs are going away. And then finally, loss of business with the government. If you've got some potentially concerning investors or people or entities that you're doing business with, that could make it difficult to do business with the government, especially if you're triggering, blacklisted companies, for example, that are known to be bad actors. And let me check, are there any questions so far?
We're still good.
Okay, perfect. So there's some very scary and some very real concerns that we've seen play out in various formats. And a lot of this is managing risk, right? Consider you might need that investment to come in to your company to fund the R&D or to, fund a certain department. But you could be opening yourself up to a lot of risk. So the more you can preempt those types of situations, you could be shoring yourself up and protecting yourself. So, know your investors. Who's the ultimate beneficial owner? Sometimes, companies look like they're from one place, but that place ends up being a tax haven. Pay attention to the investment terms. Like in the example that I gave where the board ended up kicking out the CEO, if the investment seems like you're giving a lot and you're not getting that much, you might need to negotiate some of those terms or look for investment elsewhere. But pay attention to the types of terms that are being put in place. And understanding corporate structure, who's ultimately making decisions, what does the board look like, who's on the board, those types of things. and a few other thoughts that I jotted down that actually aren't on the slide, but I saw some of the questions that were submitted, and I wanted to throw this in there as well. Understanding export control. This can be challenging for small businesses if you don't have, legal counsel that is, fluent in export control, but there may be restrictions with being able to share certain information or data that's export controlled. So understanding export controls and what that means for your business dealings might be something to think about. And then also be wary of information requests. You could potentially be handing over a bunch of information for free and not receiving investment at the end of it. We've seen some pretty sad situations where companies have been essentially tricked into thinking they're dealing with investors, and that's not really the case. So I think, maintaining your awareness and taking steps to preempt some of these risks can go a long way. Tim, I'm going to turn it over to you because I know you also had some thoughts you wanted to share.
Certainly. Thanks, Andrea. So I think the boss captured many of the most relevant top-level points, but I want to distill it down in some additional practical examples to give some context. First, recognizing that the economic and globalized environment is extraordinarily complicated. It is important to understand that screening, the type at which we do, it varies globally. And that's important. While I'm going to focus my conversation on China, many of the transactions that we have seen, many of our small business partners and even our larger partners have a global landscape where they do business in Europe or they do business in South America. And intermediaries there through subsidiaries are actually tied to China. And that results in some complications as a result of due diligence, national security checks. And given your portfolio in the small business world, we've recognized that profitability and economic viability is extraordinarily important to you. And national security might be, while important, less so than your revenue generation activities. And what I think we've seen through our office is there is a symmetry between national security and long-term profitability, because the loss of the intellectual property or control or the offshoring does have that economic impact as well as impacts for our due diligence. So what we have seen, with regard to that global landscape is, a lot of people will partner with businesses in, say, important allies to the United States. I'm thinking Canada and Europe. And through that large partnership, there may be subsidiaries with production plants in regions of China that are really problematic to us as a result of Chinese economic lawfare. For the last decade, we've seen an evolution in terms of the Chinese government and the CCP putting out very restrictive, specific economic laws. We saw in the beginning with 2014, their counter-espionage law, national security law in 2015, intelligence law in 2017, and data security laws in 2021. And individually, they target specific sectors, but in aggregate, it's really created a landscape where investments and partnerships can lead to some pretty challenging situations where data servers are in China are subject to review by the government and government entities. Source codes are subject to being targeted, and it really is a problem. Which is why we then look at tax haven countries and British Virgin Islands, Cyprus, the Caymans. Obviously, a lot of those businesses, there's actually a disproportionate percentage that is actually controlled by China. And the reasons for that are multifold. Number one, obviously, there's tax, the tax havens and tax advantages, but also because of the restrictive environment within China, there are actually difficulties in allowing foreign investment and foreign capital to own any Chinese actual entity. So they've created what is known as a variable interest entity, and it allows for shares on a contractual basis to be purchased in Chinese equities through those third-party countries in the tax haven. We see the Caymans a lot. And the implications are a U.S. business through the acquisition or the purchase or the investment and the partnership that they maintain believes that they actually own part of that company, when in reality, it's actually contingent on really just a contract. And as we've seen in some of the prospectuses, and I'm going to read directly from one of the prospectuses, where they said when they listed a joint venture on a U.S. NASDAQ, they explicitly stated in their IPO, its corporate structure does pose investment risk to investors, particularly if the PRC government finds these contractual arrangements, the VIEs, non-compliant with the restrictions on direct foreign investment in related industries. So that transaction may be invalidated based on the host nation laws, even though it comes as a result of what you would think is an investment in that tax haven country. So that goes to understanding the corporate structure, the board membership, and the investment terms. And it's something that needs to be intensively scrutinized, as well as that loss of business with the United States government, because obviously we like to know the entirety of the corporate structure and the investment terms and who everyone is partnered with in order to preserve national security. So again, very complicated environment. Understanding that China has for the last decade set in place terms that would favor themselves, and then also not assuming that just because it comes from an allied country doesn't mean that there is not an investment risk that could really degrade your long-term profitability and your business bottom line. So those are just a couple of the wave tops. I think before we transition to the next slide, I saw a couple of questions pop in, so I'll pause here and see if we want to turn to those or turn it back over to Ms. Carpenter. Otherwise, Andrea, back to you.
Well, if you, do you prefer to answer now or after? But we can go ahead and answer now. So the first question is, how can we check if an investor is on a blacklist or a bad factor list so we can run point to better protect our business?
So one list that I recommend taking a look at is, and you can find this on, it's on the Department of Defense website, but if you search for 1260H list, and I can type that into the chat, that has several companies listed that to be on the lookout for. And I'm working off of my iPad because I can't connect my video on my work computer. So unfortunately, I'd lose this if I looked for yep, that's the link. Thank you.
A couple of other things to consider. The 1260H list is certainly a best practice, and it's updated by the Department of Defense on a pretty recurrent basis to identify military-civil fusion contributors in China. The problem is, once designated, we've seen a pretty quick ability for renaming, rebranding. It's very easy to create a new corporate structure, articles of incorporation, and then create. It is really a cat and mouse game. The other thing to say is, blacklisted is somewhat misleading because a lot of the activities that we are most concerned with are actually legal. So it's not illegal to take and engage in some of these activities, but there are national security consequences and there are certainly economic consequences. So knowing your investors and asking questions, who is the board membership, and doing your due diligence by looking in their names and seeing if they're affiliated with, in this case, Chinese Communist Party entities or any other predatory groups is something certainly worth asking. Google is your friend. So again, just 1260H being a great starting point, but looking at Google, you can also identify previous filings of criminal complaints against activity, other issues that might be disadvantageous for partnership in terms of how it looks based on the optics. We've seen that a number of times where people have partnered and then all of a sudden it comes out in press that there are some either human rights or production plant type issues that could have been avoided with just some basic on the front end due diligence. Back to you, Andre.
Yep, thanks, Tim. Any other questions on this slide?
Well, we have another question in the chat. It says, what can the government do about Chinese manufacturers who machine and sell parts cheaper than American small businesses? U.S. company buy and then sell the stuff without apology.
Yeah, that's a really hard question. So some of that is just the nature of how we do business. Unlike some countries, we don't have nationalized industries where essentially the government is subsidizing certain industries and protecting them. However, the CHIPS Act is a good example of the U.S. government, carving out resources to build up and shore up the U.S. semiconductor industry. But it is very challenging. This is why protecting IP is so important. Because if you have something that the Chinese can just, copy and reverse engineer, or, they can sell you out. So protecting your IP is vitally important. Because that's probably one of the biggest ways that's happening at the onset. They are very good at reverse engineering. There's also a lot of attention being paid right now on supply chain management within the department. And supply chain management is hard. We saw a lot of this with COVID, right? Where suddenly we started realizing how interconnected all these industries were. And it's really hard once you get past like maybe the first or second tier. It's very hard in some cases, especially when you're dealing with small vendors that are providing maybe a part or something small rather than a whole system. It's very hard sometimes to know who's in that supply chain. Tim, can you think of anything else that would be helpful here? I mean, it's a huge issue, and there's no one clear-cut answer, I think.
No, unfortunately, I think you're spot on. It's a great question. It's one we've paid a great deal of thought to, and unfortunately, the answer I'm going to give you is probably not satisfactory, but it is candid and it is honest. We have had the conversations because we recognize that white labeling and saturation of the market with goods that we just can't compete with based on how they're produced overseas, it is a huge problem. I think the CHIPS Act example is indicative of a governmental recognition of that, and a concentration on that at least the advanced technology level. It is one that we struggle with as well, and we certainly understand there are some concerns there. Again, beyond the fact that we recognize and have had those conversations, I think, and this is my personal belief, that it will be forums like this and conversations like this where we bridge the government and the business divide and have a united discussion that will lead to the solutions, because I think that's really the only way to address the issue. But again, that's my personal thought, not speaking on behalf of the office. Andrea, back to you.
Thanks. We can move on to the next slide. So as I mentioned at the beginning, this is an area that's increasingly, probably since like the 2017-18 timeframe on, has garnered a lot of attention, at Congress and at the president level. We've seen several executive orders, tightening up CFIUS reviews around technology. There was a recent one on artificial intelligence. In 2018, we saw the CFIUS regulations updated. That was the FIRMA updates, the Foreign Investment Risk Reduction Modernization Act. So this added language on proximity concerns. So this is like physical co-location concerns, as well as made several other changes to the process. Treasury also recently put out publicly some mitigation enforcement guidelines that are also available online. I can find that link and share it with Destiny. There's been language in the NDAA over the past few years. It's actually pretty interesting if you dig up a version of the National Defense Authorization Act from, FYs 19, 20, 21, and you just kind of do a word search for foreign investment or China or adversarial capital, just seeing where it's popped up. A big example that's relevant to the small business community is the SBIR due diligence requirements that were in the FY 22 NDAA. So this basically requires all SBIR applicants there's a series of questions that everyone has to answer, and then there's due diligence that's being done against those applicants. We've seen legislation. The CHIPS Act is a good example, a very recent example that has some resources associated with it. We've seen lots of proposed legislation that hasn't been finalized or signed off on yet. Lots of interest in proximity. But I think that this is going to be an area where we're going to see more and more energy and effort coming out of Congress, in particular, on this topic. Trainings such as these, there's also a new DAU foreign investment course. So if any of the small businesses on the line have DAU accounts, that course is available. I believe it's ACQ 3200, I believe is the number. And then, CFIUS requirements, you can find all sorts of resources online about CFIUS requirements, in addition to the regulatory language. Lots of resources online that might be valuable if you are looking at foreign investors that may trigger CFIUS review. So I think we're going to expect to see a lot more in this space. So, keeping that in mind, increasing awareness and educating folks on these risks so you can preempt those risks. And maybe it's, seeking legal counsel, maybe it's, beefing up export control expertise. Those types of steps can help protect. Tim, did you have anything you wanted to add on this?
Not on policy and resources. I thought you did a really good job covering it. Obviously, it's an issue that we focus on extensively, and we can talk a lot about it. But given the small business community and the focus of today's meeting, the NDAA language for SBIR is the most relevant. I did want to touch base on the previous question. So in addition to the 1260H list, and this will be somewhat tangential but relevant to mention, the Bureau of Industry and Security out of Commerce maintains the entity list primarily for export control and dual use, and how you look at licensing and offshoring some of our technology. But that is a good resource just to get a good sanity check to see because obviously if the company, the individual, because it's not just companies, it also lists individuals as well. Running just a quick sanity check on who you're doing business with through that list to see if they've already been listed or designated or there are any restrictions might give you a good window into whether or not they've been looked at or they've already been scrutinized. Again, it's somewhat of a parallel and it's not directly relevant, but it is a list that's put together and it's run on behalf of the government through Commerce that's accessible to you all. And that's right off the Bureau of Industry and Security's website out of the Department of Commerce. You can just Google the U.S. entity list. Over.
Thanks, Tim. So we can move on to our conclusion slide. So just reiterating, foreign direct investment in the U.S. is not a bad thing, but adversarial ownership, control, influence, this can have an outsized impact on your business. So we need to balance the risks and opportunities. business risks and national security risks may not always align. A decision that makes sense for your business may not be the best decision for national security and vice versa. So there's a lot of factors that need to be weighed. Small businesses, like we've said a few times, you're uniquely positioned. You're doing what a lot of other companies aren't. You're critical to innovation, and the US is really good at innovation, and we want to keep it that way. So it's almost like you guys have more of a target on your back, because you are, kind of throwing Jello at the wall and seeing what sticks. And that is really valuable information for bad guys. So understanding investors and the structure of investments, there's lots of, it's amazing what you can find online, even just looking through press releases. It seems like every day there's a new article about some company that, went under because of some predatory investor or some, data being lost or something happening. So it's definitely, there's a lot of news reporting on it, and hopefully some of the resources that we provided today are helpful for all of you. Tim, do you have any closing remarks?
No, ma'am. Like I said, I appreciate the opportunity. It was a delight to speak with you all, and wanted to save the bulk of the time for questions and answers.
Okay, great to see. Okay, so our website will provide the copy of the slides, so you can stay tuned, check our website out and get a copy of the slides. There's one last question that was left in the other chat. Okay, so Andrea and Tim, I want to thank you so much for joining us today and spending time with us and giving us a brief overview as far as what's going out there with our adversaries and how we can be more alert and being alert as far as what's going on and how to recognize certain adversaries that's trying to get information and doing the things that we shouldn't be doing, and all of the great information that you all provided today. So as a wrap up, I wanted to say thanks for spending time with us today. To all the people who attended today's webinar, your feedback always fuels our content. So if there's any topic that you're itching to learn more about, drop us a line at osbp.pao@navy.mil. Look forward to the recording. This session and presentation materials will be on our website by next week. Until our next webinar, stay engaged and inspired. And again, I want to thank you all. I'm sorry, I forgot I didn't have my camera on. Thank you all for joining us today. So I greatly appreciate that. So thanks again, Andrea and Timothy. Have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.